Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens with your host, Jake and Scott. In this week's episode, we are talking about Memphis, Tennessee whiskey. That's right, Old Dominick. So sit back and buckle in to the latest episode of the Bourbon Lens. Chris, David, thank you for spending a little bit of time with us this Friday afternoon to talk about Old Dominick. We really appreciate you jumping on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. You got David out of the heat. We're in here in the AC. It's great. So thank you.
Yeah. I mean, what's it like right now working out, in the humidity right next to the old mighty Mississippi right now and producing whiskey?
It's getting more and more intense every day. We're coming up on the end of June, so we're in the peak distilling heat right now. Try to get a lot of any warehousing and, non-operations work done before noon. It's good. It's highly advised this time of year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we complain about the humidity on the Ohio. I mean, the Mississippi's like
pretty humid, yeah.
Ohio is.
They keep me in an office most of the time, but this is about as close as I can sit to David right now.
Well, hey, at least you're working hard. You're getting the money's worth out of them, right?
Yeah,
Trying to. It's
skinny.
It's a double-sided coin or a double-edged sword. Just because right now it's pretty hard to work in, but it's great for whiskey aging. So that humidity and that heat this time of year.
Getting that sweat equity in, right? It's not just about the paycheck. It's about
Literally.
sweat.
Literally.
Well, we're excited to have you. I mean, we've talked about the brand and seen the brand for a long period of time. Scott's done a great job, making sure we're kind of up to date on everything. And as I mentioned to you all prior to the podcast, we recently had Alex on and she had nothing but high praise for Old Dominick. And so we're like, we got to get this all set up. So excited to really talk about the brand and the history of Old Dominick, which I'm pretty much, I would say, ignorant on this point. Like, I know where you're located and that you make Tennessee whiskey and Tennessee bourbon. So whichever one of the two of you all would like to take a crack at sharing a little bit more about the history of Old Dominick, go for it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So my name's Chris Canale. The Old Dominick brand, actually where we are today, right above Cuckoo Canuck Restaurant on 2nd Street across from Peabody. This is D. Canale and Company, and the D is Dominick Canale. And y'all still got us, right? Okay.
Yep,
so Dominick started D. Canale and Company in 1866, and we've been in continuous operation ever since. I think he came over from Italy in 1859. Well, I know he did, and got into the wholesale liquor business right about across the street from where the distillery is today on Front Street. So he worked for his uncle for about 7 years, and then started off on his own. He had a push cart, went up and down Front Street, which at the time was called Front Row, and sold produce and sold fruits and nuts. He sold everything. Eventually, the marketing campaign was everything from avocado squash avocados to zucchini squash. And in that period of time, also began wholesale distribution of beer, wine, spirits, and also created a label called Old Dominick, which got up and running and was a pretty good sized brand. It was all private label at the time. As my uncle said, they'd take a train to Kentucky. They were buying 15, 20,000 barrels a year, and they would bring it back to Memphis and bottle it here under the Old Dominick name and several other names that we may resurrect in the future as well. But that's kind of the history of it. Prohibition shut it all down, and we stayed in the food business. And after Prohibition, we were in food and beer. Picked beer back up. We were an Anheuser-Busch distributor, so we sold Budweiser, we sold Pabst, we sold anything. Beer at the time wasn't pasteurized, so it had to stay cold. And because we were in the produce business, we had some of the biggest refrigerated warehouses in town, so that's how we got into the beer business, because all the breweries needed somebody with big refrigerated warehouses. But that's the business I grew up in. I started working there, I think, when I was 13. Something like that in the summertime. Yeah, I guess alcohol distribution. There was only a period of time during Prohibition when we weren't selling some kind of alcohol in Memphis, Tennessee. And we sold the beer company in 2010. And I guess about 2014 is when the idea came up to resurrect Old Dominick. Alex Castle, as you mentioned a minute ago, was our first employee. I think she probably started in 2015. Initially, we were going to do a private label. Same kind of thing. The more we studied it, the more we realized that we had a really good opportunity with the history of the brand and with distribution connections that we had from the beer days. We knew every bar owner in Memphis. So many things just in our face. It would have been a crime to not do it. But we didn't know anything about making whiskey at all. That's when Alex came on board, and she did a beautiful job for us. We were sorry to see her go, but that's kind of the 30,000-foot view of the history of the company.
Wow. I mean, could you imagine hauling 15,000, 20,000 barrels from Louisville down to Memphis? That would just be scary on the riverways.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
For
man.
sure. Where we are today is actually, I don't know if y'all are familiar. The mayor at the time, during really the start of Prohibition, his name was Crump. Boss Crump is what everybody called him. And Memphis was one of the last strongholds in the state of Tennessee that, even though Tennessee went ahead and implemented Prohibition, Memphis wasn't having it. I mean, this place, I'm sure you guys know, Memphis held out for several years, and the mayor, Boss Crump, stored his barrels in what is now one of our warehouses downtown. So we kind of come full circle. We're storing barrels where the mayor of Memphis stored barrels during Prohibition, interestingly enough. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. So, over the last decade, you all have been laying down whiskey, and what's it like to kind of, build that program from the ground up, right? You have a history of, private barrel, but now having your own liquid in barrels, presumably as old as 10 years old. What's it like to be able to build that, kind of brand from the ground up, even though you resurrected an old name?
I guess I can kind of take that one too. Some things you just can't do without a long time, just a long period of time. I remember laying down the first barrels that we did. First barrels we laid down, I think, was February 2017. Was barrel number one, and everybody at the Deacon Alley Company, the holding company, we all went and signed it, and like, man, it's going to be a long 5 years, I mean, that went pretty quick. But I mean, building what we have built today, we're obviously very proud of it. All I can say is it does not happen overnight. The economic moat to get into this business and do it successfully is enormous. And the time moat, most people that get into this business, I think, do it very quickly. The returns can be very good. The multiples can be very good for a fast growing brand. That was never our intent here. I mean, we've already been in business here for 160 years. So we've got a very long time frame. All the other family businesses that we have, we kind of sold. So we have kind of a different kind of perspective, and to see it get to where it's gotten, in, I guess, about 10 years now, since we went from an idea on a whiteboard to what we have today, is, pretty gratifying to know that hopefully, we'll be doing this for generations more in the future. So far, so good. And most importantly, we have absolutely awesome people, and we wouldn't be without any of them. So.
Yeah, I can add a little bit on just the fact that we're in our 8th year of operations, or the company's in the 8th year of operations of laying down barrels, and there's still kind of new challenges that arise every now and then, especially when you're growing. The same processes that worked at 300 and 400 barrels might not translate to 1,500, 2,500 barrels. So everything's kind of growing from a production standpoint year over year.
So are you guys using the same equipment that you were when you started? Or usually you hear from a brand, they're like, yeah, we put in this big still, and then in 5 years we had to double it, and we had to put in another still. And so how's that kind of worked out over the past eight or so years?
We are using the same equipment. What's really grown is storage in the past 5 years or so. So
yeah.
We now have a second warehouse that's just down the road from our distillery, so it's still right by the Mississippi River. We think that humidity being right by the Mississippi River is a huge advantage for us. But that's the biggest thing, is we outgrew our storage space. Thankfully, we're still able to use the same stills, same mash cooker, milling grain. We've been able to keep our production process largely the same, and just try to evolve on the storage side.
And we have a pretty good runway.
Speaking of,
Go ahead.
what was that?
I was just saying.
We were just saying we have a pretty good runway before any of that equipment or production equipment would have to change too. We can get up to 5,000 plus barrels at this facility. So,
oh, cool.
Yep.
So you can lay down quite a bit of whiskey.
We can.
That's good for future growth, right? Like whiskey is, about the long game and always having enough stores, right, to be able to produce as you all expand and grow in the marketplace. One of the things that's very interesting to me is the conversation around Tennessee whiskey, right? Like you're uniquely positioned where there is this, idea. You can produce Tennessee whiskey or you can produce bourbon, right? Even though bourbon is and Tennessee whiskey are one of the same, it's just an extra process. How do you go about, navigating that as an organization, right? Because it's so unique with your history really being kind of on the bourbon side, but also you have this new thing that's popped up, to create Tennessee whiskey.
Well, I think we're kind of in a great middle ground there. I'll start with our Tennessee whiskey. It's lightly charcoal filtered. So if you go to Jack Daniel's, their Lincoln County process is significantly more intensive than ours. We are doing the Lincoln County process. We are fitting the Tennessee whiskey definition, but we're also doing a barrel entry proof at 110. Very common for craft distilleries these days to have a lower barrel entry proof. And then with our bourbon, it's truly different because it is a 44% rye bourbon. So you mentioned earlier before we started the podcast that the Tennessee whiskey drinks like a bourbon. That's kind of the design on the product. That's kind of what we're going for with the Tennessee whiskey. It's still very much a Tennessee whiskey, but a traditional bourbon drinker would love that too. And I would say our high rye bourbon fits really well with traditional bourbon drinkers, but also rye whiskey drinkers. So if you're a big rye whiskey drinker, we have the perfect bourbon for you, is kind of what I like to say.
Yeah, I will say that it does have that rye whiskey minty note on the cask strength. That's really nice. That balances things out.
Yeah, kind of what I found about. I know we've talked about this too. Like once I opened these bottles and sampled them out to Jake, they've kind of set on my main bar, and every time I reach for something that's just a little bit different than what I would normally grab, it's usually one of these. The one thing I noticed about the bonded Tennessee whiskey is it actually drinks a lot higher proof than the 100 proof. Sometimes I actually catch myself and I'm like, did that pour the cask strength? Because it has a nice amount of punch and body that I wouldn't typically expect from a 100 proof bourbon. Not that 100 proof is a light whiskey, a lower proof bourbon, but this one drinks, much more punchy than I would have expected.
I would say maybe it's just the side by side. Our cask strength for 120, I think the batch you have is 124 proof.
Yep.
And I think those drink very smooth or very easy sipping for a 65 or 60+% alcohol. I think our Tennessee whiskey's pretty fantastic at our bonded proof at 100 proof, but
yeah.
I totally agree with that statement. I just find myself always on the cask strength side saying like, how is this 124 proof,
Well, it's got like a nice fruitiness to it too. And maybe it's that rye characteristic that it's like mintiness, but it's not like grassy, but it's got the nice like orange peel notes that I typically look for like in a rye whiskey that I would want to put in a cocktail or whatever, because it has that orange characteristic. But this one just poured neat. It's got a nice amount of fruit to it. So I kind of forget that the mash bill it's almost like 50-50 corn and rye. If you really look at it. So
That you mentioned that Tennessee whiskey had a lot of body, and that's what Alex Castle always said too. Is it's got so much body, and I think part of it, I'm sure, is the climate down here, but part of it too is that we barrel at 110. So
okay.
we're not diluting a whole lot to get down to a bonded proof. Interestingly too, our proof goes up in the barrel here, which is something else that makes no sense to me. Maybe David can explain it. He's the mad scientist at the company, but that just always blew my mind. You said that barrel or the cask strength you have there, the bourbon is 120.
124.62.
That went in the barrel at 110.
Yeah.
Some all the way up in the high 140s.
Yeah, we've had some recent 7 and some of these barrels that are turning 8. We're starting to see some of them get up into the hazmat range, which is pretty crazy since they were barreled at 110 proof and they're getting we pull samples and they're above 140. So part of that is our aging loft climate. Like we're by the Mississippi River, but It's also in this loft climate. It's very high heat up there, and so we're actually trying to recreate some of that climate in other parts of our warehouse. We've just found it's a highly effective aging kind of climate that we're working with. But yeah, we're diluting. We distill at about 130 proof, and we're diluting down to 110 proof. That proof is going to rise maybe 2 or 3 proof points a year. So after 6 or 7 years, we end up at about 122 proof. Depends on the mash bill, depends on where exactly it was in the warehouse.
And then I noticed also you put batch size on the back of the label, which I appreciate all of the information on the labels. It's just helpful for the whiskey nerds in us. But batch size on both of these is 6 barrels. So do you kind of, when you're developing a batch, are you taking from different parts of the rickhouses, or are you trying to maybe zone in on a particular area and then just produce a batch that might be a little bit more unique? What's kind of your thought process behind that?
With our cask strength, I'm trying to keep that pretty consistent as you can without adding water. And so certainly different parts of the warehouse go into where I'm pulling barrels from. Also age, also could be distilling season that affects the final flavor a lot, whether or not it started in the spring or started in the fall. There's a lot of variance between our vintages. So with our cask strength, there's more freedom to have uniformity because I can choose from different vintages. Really, my main constraint is I'm trying to pull from over 6-year-old barrels, and I'm trying to pull in that 6-barrel range. Whereas Tennessee whiskey has to come from the bonded Tennessee whiskey has to come from the same distilling season. So if you have a different batch of bonded that might be slightly off, it's likely vintage related.
Gotcha.
But with the cask strength, I'm trying to blend for chocolatey fruitiness. It's a high rye and it's high proof, so I'm trying to mitigate that a little bit and add some complexity with the blend.
No, I think that's really interesting, and I do like that you do have the vintages to them all, because you're going to get different experiential pieces of it. But what's interesting, or what my question is, my thought is, how many different types of mash bills are you all laying down currently? Because it seems like you have a wide variety of whiskey available.
That's a great question. So we had 3 mash bills until recently. Now we've expanded to 5 mash bills. So we talked before the podcast about our wheat whiskey, which is our 3rd mash bill, estate mash bill to come out from the Old Dominick Distillery. I'll just quickly touch on that. We waited 7 full years for our wheat whiskey to come out, and we're only putting those barrels out in single barrels this year. Those are also coming out at a little over 120 proof. It's an 83% wheat mash bill. So that's our 3rd mash bill. We've mentioned our low rye or 13% rye Tennessee whiskey mash bill. We've mentioned the high rye 44% rye mash bill. Recently, we've added a wheated bourbon mash bill, which is a 25% wheat mash bill, and we've also started distilling single malt whiskey here at Old Dominick Distillery, which is something it's been very exciting because American single malt is really just coming to fruition. There's certainly some people that are doing some great single malt whiskeys out there, but it's not heavily closed in like bourbon is from a definition and process standpoint. Bourbon is very well defined. We know what that kind of flavor profile works out as, whereas American single malt is very undefined, and we're kind of exploring that.
Yeah. And, I'm sure you probably have some unique double oaking that you could do with, your Tennessee whiskey double oaked American single malt. That's right there off the bat. Just give you all a little marketing advantage there.
Something like that might be hitting the market soon.
Or maybe they already had that marketing advantage and they didn't need me to say a word. So, you bring up single malt. We've been on the American single malt train since the beginning. I feel like because Scott is like scoured the earth of America, or scouted America during COVID, and like that came up. Like all the craft distilleries that were willing to talk were American single malt distillers. So like starting with the Tennessee whiskey and moving into that malted grain, like has it been hard to work with? What do you found unique about that? Really, just break that down, because I find it fascinating when whiskey producers or bourbon Tennessee whiskey producers get into the American single malt, because it seems completely different from what they traditionally do.
It's been very different. I wouldn't say just different from bourbon, but very different from other folks making single malt whiskey, as we are a column and pot process making our single malt whiskey. We're also open faced fermenters. We're all grain in on the mash. So we're taking some of these bourbon styles of making whiskey and applying them to American single malt, whereas typically single malt whiskeys, pot stills, you're doing wort separation, so you're not an all grain in distillation. So trying to adapt a process like that, the fermentation in particular for single malt has been quite different. I've had the opportunity to see single malt distilleries and just observe their process and try to adapt that for American and Tennessee whiskey.
Yeah. Has it been a longer fermentation process to be able to get all the, to the right content you need, or has it been a shorter fermentation process? How's that been different?
It has been a slightly longer and colder, slightly cooler fermentation process. Our bourbon is typically in the 80-degree range on the fermentation. Single malt is going to be closer to 70 degrees on that. So trying to figure out that time and temperature, that was quite a learning curve that we ran up in a couple weeks.
How often, how do you balance running all of these different mash bills, right? As a craft distiller, you got to keep the main thing. How do you balance, some of these different mash bills, like a wheated bourbon that might not be full purview all the time, or the American single malt? How do you balance out like when to run these things so you could have it at a decent, availability for people to get a hold of?
So in terms of how we project, that's kind of the magic of the whiskey game. If anybody knows exactly how much to produce, please let me know. But that's a great question. I'm very beneficial, or I benefit a lot from the decisions that were made at the start of the company. My biggest advantage right now is capacity. And so if we want to hit our numbers with our Tennessee whiskey and our high rye bourbon, we can certainly hit our numbers. And I have plenty of freedom to explore these new mash bills as well. So we have the benefit of being able to just run longer and run more often right now. Whereas if we were capacity constrained, there would be more of a triage decision. But all of our mash bills are growing right now in terms of production.
You ever been to Buffalo
really cool.
Trace and seen the sign in the yard of Buffalo Trace? It says, we make whiskey at a profit. Sometimes we make whiskey at a loss, but every day we make good whiskey.
Yeah.
Like David's saying, no telling what the market's going to want, especially not in 5 years. But all you can control is what you can control, and we're putting out the best product that we can, and all you can do. Who knows what everybody's going to want in 2031 or whatever it is.
Well, and you're putting it out at really good ages too. You're putting it out, it's 6, 7 years old. Like, that's nothing to scoff at too. It's like, wow, this stuff is really, it's a good value play. It's good price,
We appreciate that.
Price for, for proof and for age. Like, I think that's something you guys got to really embrace, because, you're a younger distillery, but you're putting out whiskey that's near how old you are. And then I think that's very admirable.
And we've held a lot back too. We're holding back 20-30% of every vintage.
There's more to come, definitely on the age statement side. A lot of people say everything comes down to quality, but for us, it's truly is what we talk about. Every week we're talking about what products we should put out, and we always come down to the fact that we're not going to just put something out for quick cash. We want to make something for the long run. We want to make something that people are going to enjoy 2 and 3 times over, rather than just have a sip and kind of put it down. And you mentioned value. We are really committed to value, to making sure that we're not putting out whiskeys that are way overpriced and then kind of young and maybe not aged. So we're very fortunate to be able to make decisions basically entirely on quality.
Well, I think that's the thing, right? Like, if your whiskeys are under $100, you're going to appeal to a lot of consumers, probably most consumers. And if you're under $75, you're appealing to pretty much the average whiskey drinker, right? That will go out and spend money. And then they start the comparison game. Well, this has an age statement, or this is this. And so when you can kind of stack up against any of the heritage brands, I like to say, from a price perspective and age perspective, then people are like, hey, why not give this a try? Because it stacks up, and it could be on par from a price perspective, or you see something in there that you might like a little bit more, like a higher rye mash bill, and you're kind of on the fence, don't want to buy a rye or bourbon, you can just get, the high rye bourbon. That's what I find interesting is, find your niche and run with it, right? So if your niche is quality, with the ability to appeal to, the average whiskey drinker that's looking for something new. I mean, not everybody can do that.
And it's hard to
Well,
have that
so that's
flagship brand too that you kind of talked about. I mean, there was a point in time when we thought Tennessee was going to be it. Because we're in Tennessee, and lots of reasons why we thought that would be the case. The bourbon sells better today than the Tennessee whiskey does, because I think we kind of, frankly, probably overestimated the Tennessee whiskey category. And let's face it, Tennessee whiskey category is Jack Daniels and a little bit of Jordan Bull. But so we probably overestimated that a little bit. But I think that for somebody our size and our age, it's probably kind of dangerous right now to say that this is going to be what we're going to make. This is going to be our flagship product when it's so hard to compete. Like, we mentioned earlier, the number of states that we're in is, we're not nationwide yet. And to be able to spend that kind of marketing dollars behind one flagship brand or one, when you're competing with somebody that's worldwide right now, we just had better success, like you said, focusing on quality. And so far we've been fortunate that the market is kind of coming to us. So,
yeah.
And then
Makes
the wheat whiskey single barrel, remind me on the price. Was that like $70? Is that what it is?
I believe our MSRP is 60 to 65 on that. So you may see it for up to 70. But yeah, it's a 7-year-old wheat whiskey. It's estate produced.
Single barrel.
And, you asking about, we were talking about flagship. As of the past 2 months, we've only had a wheat whiskey out for 2 months. And I think we might be one of the premier wheat whiskey distilleries just based on market reaction. I love the product, but I'm biased, but our initial reactions seem to be pretty great. And I would say American whiskey as a portfolio, I think we're really putting ourselves on the map. Just Tennessee, American bourbon, now American wheat whiskey. And we certainly have plans for more American whiskey.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask David, tell him about the wheated bourbon mash bill. Apparently we're a wheat distillery.
We might be. Just goes back to like we've been here for 8 years, or the company's been here for 8 years. I've been here for about half that, and we're still finding new things with our wheated bourbon mash bill. We've seen some of our best yields. We've seen seems to be some of our best distillate that's ever come off the still, and that's been really exciting. Of course, that's kind of goes back to what Chris said about 2017. You put something in a barrel, now we got to wait 5 years. But what came off the still is it's very exciting already.
No. That's pretty awesome. And one of the things I was interested in, is Chris, given your all's family's background around like the produce part of that, how do you see the agricultural side of this play out? Like, how do you all work with the farms around you all to be able to have enough production of corn and rye and wheat? And what's that look like for you, given your all's family history in that space?
I mean, frankly, today, what is surrounding us in Memphis, I mean, we're surrounded by agriculture everywhere. Eastern Arkansas, North Mississippi, West Tennessee but it's all, a lot of it's commodity just driven. A lot of it's going straight over to the river and getting put on a barge and going to just worldwide.
Yeah.
And it's kind of shocking to me, or it was in the beginning. It's hard to find a grain broker around here that will deal on a local level. They're all going straight to these big brokers, these big grain dryers that are going to eventually end up on a barge. And they're not equipped today to do that. I guess, David, why don't you kind of tell them where we are today as far as grain sourcing? Because obviously, the specs are different from what we want than what the farmers around here are used to providing.
We're sourcing grain. Our traditional bourbon grains like corn and rye, they could come from Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana. We work with a number of corn suppliers, but they're typically in that region west of Nashville, sometimes coming from Louisville. Our barley's coming from the Midwest. Typically, barley tends to grow better in the western states.
Yeah.
One thing that's very unique about our distillery is originally our barrels were being sourced from Canali property. And so since then, we've expanded to just West Tennessee oak. But I think that's something that's really unique that we have that a lot of other distilleries aren't doing, is that we are trying our best to control where our barrels are coming from, or at least our staves are coming from the general area as well.
No, that's very cool. Like, control what you can control, right? Because bourbon is an agricultural product, right? Like, at the end of the day, with a little bit of science behind it. And I think that's the beauty of it, because it does make it the American spirit because of how agricultural based it is, and the hard work that goes into be able to create the grains and the things that allow us to have great things to sip on, from here and there, and everywhere. So I appreciate that, because it's always interesting, especially in the rise of like heirloom grain, and people trying to bring things back or do things, differently. It's always interesting to see everyone's approach to it.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, we did get a crash course in on the barrel side of things because we launched right in the barrel shortage. Well, we said initially we started laying down barrels with MGP in 2014 because we needed a bourbon for the base for the Dominick Toddy, which if you guys
Yeah.
don't have some of that, we'll send you some, or you can pick it up there in Kentucky. But it's a bourbon base, and we wanted to launch with that when we opened the doors in 2017, and so we got some MGP produced, but MGP didn't even have any barrels.
Oof.
14, I don't know if you guys remember all that, but that was kind of a consequence of the housing crisis in 2008, 2009. Like 40% of the logging industry went under. And then when it came back, the loggers that were left could focus on veneer logs, which is like cabinets and flooring and, the nice stuff. So nobody was cutting any trees that could be used for barrels. So that's why we had to start. We literally had to create our own supply chain and started aging our own barrels. But we are probably the only distillery, certainly that I can think of. Maybe some build their own barrels, maybe. But even the heritage distilleries, as you guys call them, they can't tell you where their wood's coming from. And I do think it matters. I mean, 90% of the flavor profile comes from the barrel. And we're coming from just West Tennessee. It's coming from Independent Stave, which is a huge cooperage in Missouri, but they have log yards all over the country. And we kind of, through that process of having to come up with our own barrels, we got to know the Stave yard. It's about 2 counties over from here in Erie County. And so all the wood that Independent Stave gets for us is coming from that particular wood yard. So we kind of had fun with that one.
That's pretty cool.
Interesting.
It's definitely unique, for sure. Have you all ever dabbled in finished product?
So we're doing more and more of that as of recently, as far as like traditional finishes. We've got some really unique beer barrel finishes that our R&D line was built on. And so some of those y'all may have heard of. All the Cookies was a pretty well-known one. And those are basically barrel trades that we'll do with local breweries. We'll take back some of their barrels after they've aged a beer in it, and we'll age. Typically, it's been our bourbon, but we've started to do some Tennessee whiskey. You mentioned a double oaked whiskey. We've got some of those working right now in aging. So some Tennessee whiskey. We've also got some wine barrels, some dessert wine barrels, and some hybrid stave barrels as well, with some French oak. And I would say to boil that down, we're doing a lot of finishing right now as we speak.
Yeah. No, I think finishing's here to stay. And from my point of view, I think it's something that just to have a little bit, like 1 to 2%, I think will go a long way when it comes to, appealing to consumers, and the things they want. Because some people, if you're dealing with port, for instance, they want that sweeter, flavor profile that port creates, along with bourbon. And then you add that to a Tennessee whiskey, it's going to be like super complex and super fruity. So I think that's super, relevant to stay on, because the finishing world is, I think, here to stay, and something really people appreciate.
The thing that we're doing with finishing is our finishing products are actually older, so they are still in that 6 to 7 year range. It's not like we're finishing this 2-year whiskey and trying to get it out into the market. So we're still holding that quality up. And there are some finishes that maybe we held back a little bit because we didn't feel like we met our standards.
Yeah. Well, again, if it's all about quality, right, you got to release the right things at the right time.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys pinpointing exactly what's unique about us, and maybe that is quality. We've been trying to figure that out for like 8 years now, so
that's why we're here.
We're here. It's just 1 hour, a couple technical difficulties later, we got a marketing strategy. Old Dominick, quality whiskey.
Actually, yeah, the corporate, well, I guess you could say our corporate motto is quality products, quality service by quality people. So there you go.
There you go. Fits right into it. One thing I do want to hit on, because I find it very interesting, is everybody knows TJ, and better known as Bruzel. He's got a rather large YouTube following, and many liquor store owners know him because he's traveled, I feel like, across the country at this point to buy whiskey. You all have partnered with him, and I find it very interesting. Can you share a little bit about what that partnership with TJ and Bruzel's like?
So I guess it started out, we did some partnership with them with some,
Yeah, I could. Originally, we started doing. We did kind of like a chopped or like a cooking show competition type deal, but he adapted it for blending bourbon. He got some contestants into our distillery, and they made some blends, some experimental series blends. Those were there was some stave finishing involved. That was mainly kind of our bourbon products and Tennessee whiskey products. And so we launched 2 of those whiskeys. They were both 5-barrel blends, so we did 10 barrels total. Those were very successful, and they were certainly experimental projects, and we were very happy to do those. We've also been fortunate to work with him on some single barrels, so we just had some single barrels go out for Bruzel and his team. And the more recent Rooster run, I'll let Chris give some background on that. It's more his area.
So TJ Bruzel and our sales director Clark Shafani have they've become friends. They get along famously. I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know, but they get along real well, and they come up with these ideas, which is great. It's been fun. They're fun guys to work with. I think they've enjoyed working with David and his team over at the distillery. David's been so flexible, just commend you on that. Because, those guys like TJ Bruzel and our sales director, Clark Shafani, they will turn on a dime with an idea. And, that's hard to do. You're trying to run a production facility, and here come these guys like, hey, we're going to go buy a car and we're going to go drive it, But so I had just pulled up where they started in Amarillo. Was that Sunday night? Yeah, it was Sunday. There was a speakeasy in Amarillo, the Old Dominick Rooster Run. They're doing promotions all from Amarillo, and they're going to end in Atlanta. I think DJ is from Auburn, War Eagle. But they're somewhere in Dallas right now, McKinney, Texas. Then they go through Denton, Springdale, Arkansas, Bentonville, Rogers, Fayetteville. They go through Arkansas, Little Rock, down to Oxford, Mississippi, and then on into Georgia. And they do promotions along the way, tastings. They give away product, and they're going to end up in Atlanta and give away that car, which some lucky Bruzel Old Dominick fan's going to get. Yeah, I don't even know what year that thing is. We didn't spend a whole lot on it, I can tell you that. But hopefully it makes it that far. But they're having a good time, that's for sure.
Well, it looks great. It does look great. So, hey, any way to get that out, I think is awesome, because I feel like it's a unique experience. And whether you win the car or not, if you got the chance to try the Tennessee whiskey or the cask strength bourbon, you should be a fan after you drink them, right? I think that is the most important thing that we learned today is you're making quality whiskey, and people should enjoy some Old Dominick the next time they go to the liquor store and look for something unique to buy in their local areas. So really appreciate you all spending some time with us and sending us whiskey and sharing a little bit about your story. And I'm excited for what the future is, whether it's the wheat whiskey or the American single malt. I think you all have got a bright future.
Thank you both for having us on.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
Really
lot of
appreciate
fun.
it. Hope you all have a great weekend, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Cheers, y'all.
All right. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.